Jarrett Lerner is the award-winning creator of more than a dozen books for kids, including the Engineered series of middle grade novels, the Hunger Heroes series of graphic novel chapter books, the illustrated novel in verse A Work in Progress, and the Nat the Cat series of early readers.
Thank you, guys. I've never been introduced by like a disembodied voice. That was a first for me. So hi, thank you guys for coming. My name, they have a very handy clock right there. I don't even need my own clock. All right, my name is Jarrett Lerner. I'm an author and an illustrator of books, of about 20 books. This is some of my books. It is not up to date. Updating this picture was on my to-do list, but I've got 3 little kids at home, and my to-do list often takes a back seat to other more urgent matters, so I didn't get a chance. But these are some of my books. I think they've got all of these and more outside at the story cupboard. I signed all of them and doodled in all of them, and I'll be around for a few minutes to personalize any last-minute books if anyone wants any. What I want to do with my time here today is answer 2 questions. Before I get up in a crowd of librarians, teachers, anyone, I like to think hard about how I'm going to spend my time, because your time is valuable, and I respect and appreciate it enormously, and I want to try to offer you something that you can take away from here and bring back into your classrooms, into your schools, into your libraries. So I'm an admirer of your work, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a bit about mine. So I'm going to answer these 2 questions, very simple questions. How I got here and why I think I'm here. The first question, why I got here, is not, or how I got here, sorry, is not, the answer is not on a plane or any of that stuff. It's more abstract and complicated. And to answer the question of how I got here, I have to take you back, way back in time, to a place that a kindergartner recently referred to as the 1900s. Specifically, he asked me how old I was, and then I told him, and he did some mental math, and then said, "You were born in the 1900s?" He was shocked. I think I was the first person he met born in another century. So I'm going to take you back to the 1990s specifically. And this is me. This is little Jarrett in 3rd grade. This is the main character of our story, so I want to tell you a bit about this little boy. He was smart. He was pretty smart. He was clever, decently smart. But he had not been convinced or persuaded to use his smarts in an academic setting. And so what this little kid did was use his smarts just enough to fly right under the radar, not so low that he would require extra attention, and not so high that he would get extra attention, but just in the middle. Surely you have all met kids like this who are not using their full potential because they're not engaged, they're not invested for whatever reason. That was me. I did just well enough in school so that my parents would be happy and my teachers would be happy, and they would ignore me the rest of the time. And the rest of the time, what I was doing was something that I had learned was not okay to do in school. What I was doing was drawing. I have loved to draw ever since my parents were brave enough to give me a marker and set me loose in their house. And I've been doing it ever since, constantly, on everything I could get my hands on. This is another relic of the past century. This is from a fax machine. You can tell by the little text up there. This is a faxed drawing I sent to my dad when he was on a business trip when I was a little kid. And I don't think any of you have ever met my dad, but it's a striking resemblance. It's uncanny. He looks exactly like that. So drawing was my thing. It was always my thing. Drawing was how I made sense of the world. It's how I organized my thinking about the world and myself and other people. It's how I expressed myself. It's how I discovered what mattered to me, what I liked, what I didn't like. It was everything. Drawing is how I processed the world. And I developed other passions. For a while, it was baseball. But nothing could supplant drawing, art, visual language, and an exploration of that. Every other passion was subsumed by drawing. And I drew and drew and drew and drew. And so this was me, a little third grader, totally lost in his world of doodles, popping his head up just enough to make sure the adults looked the other way. And surely, some of you might have had some kids who you recognize this description as. I meet them all the time at school visits. So when I'm at those school visits, what I do is I work with kids and try to arm them with the same information and tools I have that have made me what I think is a good reader and a strong writer and a strong illustrator. And when I talk to them about stories and how they work, I try to make it as simple as possible. And one of the things I tell them about story is that all stories basically are a character who wants something and faces obstacles in getting it. And if you break it down like that, kids can sort of wrap their heads around it, and then you can complicate it as you go. But that's how I talk about story with kids. So this is our character, and our character wants to avoid detection, be left alone by adults and authority figures, teachers, parents, and draw. But I want to tell you a good story, so there needs to be an obstacle. And the obstacle in this story is fourth grade teacher Charlie Lombard. I was very careful how I drew Mr. Lombard here, because I wanted to include 3 things that Mr. Lombard was never, ever, ever without. Number 1, his glasses. His glasses were enormous. I think I even made them smaller here because you would have thought I was trying to caricature him, and I'm not. But he had very large glasses, super thick, and they would magnify his eyes. And he had very penetrating eyes that would move around. He saw everything. The second thing Charlie Lombard was never without was a suit. He wore a suit and tie, often a vest as well, every single school day. It would be the 173rd day of school, not the last one where you're celebrating and would maybe dress up, but at the end when everyone's ready to be done and it's boiling outside, he would show up in a wool 3-piece suit. And I took that to mean that Mr. Lombard took his job seriously, and he did. He took his job incredibly seriously. But the third thing Mr. Lombard was never without was a little smile. He always had this knowing smile, and it was often erupting into a laugh. He had a giant, booming, cackling laugh that you would hear almost immediately entering the school, even if you were, nowhere near his classroom. He always was finding things to laugh about and find joyful. And that's how I most remember Mr. Lombard. So I got into his class in 4th grade, and I expected it to be the same sort of thing as always, as 3rd grade, as 2nd grade, as 1st grade. But he's my obstacle, and where we met, the point of conflict, our sort of battleground, it was all over. Where do I point this thing? A book. I can't remember exactly what the book is, but there have been some strong guesses that are likely. But it was a book about a boy in the Revolutionary War, which was in the 1700s, which is even earlier than the 1900s. Very long ago, very long ago. And I, as a 10-year-old boy, walking into Mr. Lombard's class, I had never been taught how to be a reader. I had never been taught how to open up a book and bring myself to it and take something from it that was meaningful to me. I did not know how to read. I knew how to move my eyes over the pages. I could do that all fine and prove that I was where I was supposed to be, but I didn't know how to read. I didn't know how to use books as the tools they are. This book was about a time, a place, about people that were totally foreign to me. I couldn't find anything to relate to, any points of connection, anything to find interest. I didn't know how to, even if I was game to do it. But I knew that I was going to periodically be quizzed on this book to see if I was indeed reading it. And I was going to have to prove that if I wanted to not be detected and found out and get in trouble. So I cheated. What I did was talk to my friend, Jordy Keeler, who, for whatever reason, I'm not sure how, I wish I knew now, he had already caught the reading bug. He read all the time. And he read even the books that we were assigned that he didn't love and that didn't relate to him that much. He found something of value in that. He knew how to do that. And Jordy would come in every day, and he would, when we were assigned chapters of our book, and he would come in, and me and a couple of my other friends, Bobby and Alex, we would meet at Jordy's cubby, and he would tell us what we needed to know about the chapters the night before. He would say, the horse he rides is brown. He can't fire the musket. It takes him 3 tries. His uncle breaks his ankle. He would tell us all that stuff. And then we would sit down in class, and if we got a reading quiz that day, it would say, what is the boy's uncle hurt? And I'd say, oh, his ankle. And that's what I did. And it's what I had done the year before and the year before. And I would get consistently 8 out of 10s, 9 out of 10s. I would pass. I would get by. And this is what always had been fine for me growing up. But about 3 or 4 quizzes into the year, something shifted. And I began to get this eerie sense that even though I was getting 8s out of 10s and 9s out of 10s on my reading quizzes, I got this sense that Mr. Lombard sort of somehow knew that I was cheating and that I wasn't actually reading my book. I think it's a skill they must teach educators and librarians at school, this sort of sixth sense to see past a child's, to see the truth. And eventually, after another quiz, I knew for a fact, I just knew it in his eyes, in his body language. Mr. Lombard knew. And then it got even deeper. It got to a point where he knew that I knew that he knew. It got really tense and confusing for a little 4th grade brain. And one day, it all came to a head. I knew it was time. I knew it was going to happen sooner or later. Mr. Lombard came to pass back one of our reading quizzes, and he set it down on my desk, face down, and he didn't move. He didn't keep going. He didn't hand the next person their quiz. He just stood there and looked at me. And I knew what was going to happen. He was going to say, see me after class, or go to the principal's office, or maybe even worse, maybe he was going to say something about what I'd been doing in front of the whole class and humiliate me. I was ready for it. My punishment was upon me. But Mr. Lombard didn't do any of those things. Mr. Lombard looked at me and probably saw that on the back of the quiz I had turned in, it was covered in doodles, I'm sure. And he said, oh, I missed a slide. That's me looking at this book and thinking, what? Mr. Lombard said, "Jarrett, you really like to draw, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And then he moved on. And I turned over the piece of paper, and I had gotten, I don't know, an 8 out of 10, a 9 out of 10. And that was that. No see me after class. Mr. Lombard let me leave his room at the end of the day and get on the bus. And I couldn't have said it then. I couldn't have put it into words. But what Mr. Lombard did that day is something that no teacher had ever done for me before. They had seen me for exactly who I was, not even as a student. They weren't seeing how I was performing in class. He saw me as a human being, and he saw exactly what was most important to me, and he met me there, and he asked me about it. And it was amazing. Also, I wasn't in trouble. That was probably, to be honest, in 4th grade, the most exciting thing. But the next day, Mr. Lombard came back, and he had with him a huge piece of beautiful white paper and a brand new set of colored pencils. And he came to my desk, and he said, "Jarrett, I want to ask you something." He said, "This book, I think the publisher probably should have put a map in the front. There are a lot of locations. We're moving all over the place. It's very confusing. I know some of your classmates are confused. How would you feel about making us a map that we can use in class?" And I just wanted that piece of paper and those colored pencils. I said, "I'll draw you a map. I've drawn maps. I'll draw whatever you want. I'll draw." And he gave them to me, and I went home, and I sat down, and I said, "Oh man, he tricked me. Mr. Lombard tricked me." Because if I want to make a map, and I didn't want to just make a map, I wanted to make a map that I was going to be proud of. I didn't hand over drawings unless I was proud of it. I cared about drawing. I cared about it more than anything. If I wanted to give a drawing that I was going to be proud of, I had to read the book. And so I started reading the book. And I did not love the book. But what the process showed me, it changed the way I looked at books. I learned how to look at books in a different way. I learned how to bring myself as an individual, as a person, to my reading and read the book as me, not as a mindless person gathering facts to regurgitate to prove I had moved my eyes over every single word and absorbed the information. I learned how to read that book like a reader, like a human being. And it was huge. I made that map. I brought it into Mr. Lombard's class, and he hung it at the front of the classroom. And for the rest of the time we were reading that book, anytime we were discussing something, he would orient the whole class. He would say, "Let's look at Jarrett's map." He would orient us. If we moved, he would move us over. Basically, to sum it up in a metaphor, I had spent my life in school up until that moment with 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And Mr. Lombard had dragged me in, both feet. He brought me into that classroom. He figured out how to do it, and he didn't stop there. Because Mr. Lombard was unique in other ways from any of the teachers I had. Mr. Lombard was the first teacher I knew and the first teacher I had who had anything that you could reasonably call a classroom library. He had bookshelves in the back of his book. They must have been hundreds of books, maybe 400 or 500, 2 bookshelves right side by side. And those books were just there, and we didn't have to go over there, but he encouraged us constantly. He told us what was on it, what he was moving, what other kids were reading, but those were our books that we could go and grab from, take home, read, whatever. He let us know that while we were in his class, while we were his students, those were our books. That was our library. And Mr. Lombard couldn't get me to go over there alone, but he brought me books. He asked more about what I didn't like about that book, what sort of stuff I was into. He learned more about me as a human being, and he found books that appealed to me. The first ones that did it were funny books. It blew my mind when I first read a book that made me laugh out loud. And I went and I could tell my friends the jokes in it. It floored me. That's what did it for me. Being allowed and encouraged to read books that were going to delight me in that way. Mr. Lombard wouldn't leave me alone. He gave me more books and more books and more books. And by the end of my 4th grade year, I was a reader. I not only could read, but I was a reader. And it's also what got me into writing. That is a copy of the first comic book I ever made in Mr. Lombard's class. At the very end of our 4th grade, we did a short story unit. And we read a whole bunch of short stories, and then our assignment was to write one. And I wrote 17 short stories, and I illustrated covers for every single one, hand-lettered the titles, like I do for my own books now. And Mr. Lombard took them all, and he brought them into this room in our school where teachers were always disappearing, where we weren't allowed to look in, but we would sometimes peek. And he came back a couple days later, and he had bound the book for me with this thick green cardboard over it, and it said something like Jarrett's Stories. And he made me a book, my first book, Mr. Lombard. He did that all for me in the space of a year. And then I left Mr. Lombard's class, and the next year in 5th grade, I had Mr. Heron. And Mr. Heron was as different from Mr. Lombard as someone could possibly get. I don't know why. Well, he retired the year after he had me. I kind of wish he had moved things along sooner because he wanted to be there less than anyone. And I remember being distraught about it at the beginning of the school year. And I actually came home to my mom one day. She still tells me this story. And when I told her what I was talking about when I first did this keynote, she brought this up. I cried. I came home crying and said I just wanted to go back to Mr. Lombard's class. And she said, you can't. But she said, there are more Mr. Lombards. You're going to have more Mr. Lombards. And 4th grade was enough to get me through 5th grade, to keep me going. The example of Mr. Lombard and the idea that I would meet other teachers like him and have that sort of experience pushed me through and got me through. And at the very end of 5th grade, my elementary school was K through 5. We did that thing that I think a lot of schools do where on the last day, the kids who are graduating gather and they march through the hallway and all the kids clap. It's like a parade. And then sometimes like a teacher would pop out and take a kid aside and say something. And Mr. Lombard pulled me aside when he saw me. And I was still close to him in 5th grade, even though he wasn't my teacher. I was still regularly seeing him. And he pulled me aside and just said, I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited to see what you'll do, what you'll become. And he told me to keep reading. And he said, I don't remember it verbatim, but he basically said something along the lines of, you can find basically anything you're looking for in a book. You can always go to books. Books will always be there. Some words of encouragement that reminded me that I now had this relationship with books. And I wish I could tell you that our story ends there and it has a happy ending. But you all know that once you graduate from elementary school, you go to middle school. Middle school, I have learned, I was talking about this last night at dinner, I have learned to love middle school and love middle schoolers. I've been on tour with a book since it came out about 10 or 11 months ago, and it has made me not afraid of middle schoolers. It has made me understand them much better. But my own experience in middle school made me very scared of them. Middle school, by the time I got there, things were very different. I had grown, I had changed, I had developed some insecurities, some issues, sort of, kind of standard middle school fare, as it tends to be. And by the time I got to middle school, I was a much different kid And I was a much less happy, boisterous, joyful kid. And I wrote about this time of my life in this book, A Work in Progress. It's an illustrated novel in verse. And rather than describe my middle school life, I'm just going to read to you from the opening. I spent 3 years on this book, and so I could not possibly summarize my middle school experience better than I made the pages of this book. So I'm going to read to you from the beginning, and I'm going to show you some of the illustrations that appear alongside these poems in the beginning of the book. So the book is about a 7th grader named Will Chambers, and the book begins with him looking back on a memory of 4th grade. And just as a heads up, the book, I should have said this right away, the book is a fictionalization of my experience being bullied and body shamed and developing disordered eating and an eating disorder and body dysmorphia and a whole host of other things. So just want to make sure I announce that. So I always think back to 4th grade. I was minding my business, hanging out in the hallway with Dave and Andrew and Devin, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and saw a kid, Nick Fisher, standing there. Nick was in my grade and small for his age. In 4th grade, he looked more like a 3rd grader or even a 2nd grader. And I don't know if it was because of that or because of something else he had going on in his life, but he always went around already halfway to angry. He was the kind of kid who'd snap at you for no reason if you just looked at him the wrong way on the wrong day. I knew right then that whatever his reason for getting my attention, it couldn't be good. "You're fat," Nick said. No, he spat it, that word. He spat it at me like it was the worst one he knew. Like I'd committed a crime, and he wanted to make sure I knew I was guilty. "You're fat," Nick said, and the whole entire hallway fell silent. Everyone was looking. Everyone was listening. At first, I was too stunned to do a thing. My brain was racing, my heart pounding, but the rest of me frozen stiff. All I could do was stare at the shark showing off its teeth on Nick's t-shirt. Then Dave, he set his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Will," and for whatever reason, that broke the spell. I got out of there as fast as I could. Something like that happens to you, something like what happened to me in that hallway with Nick Fisher in 4th grade, and it never leaves your head. It's in there forever, permanently. The memory might as well be tattooed on your brain. It'll replay again and again and again and again. On bad days, of course, but on good days too. On days that had been good until, bam, it sneaks up on you. It just pops out of the blue. And it's not long before you don't even need the Nick Fishers of the world to be there to tell you what they think of you, what the whole entire world thinks of you, that you are less than, you are inferior, you are an animal not worthy of kindness or consideration or respect. Soon enough, you take care of saying all of that for them. You start thinking just like they do. You start hurling the insults at yourself. You become your own bully, and you do the job better than anyone else possibly could. So that is me in middle school. And going through all that stuff, I did exactly what Will Chambers does in my book. I sort of sabotaged my friendships through a lot of dishonesty and pretending everything was fine. I couldn't stand to be around other people. I couldn't stand to be around myself. And so I hid away. And things got very dark as they can get. And just like Will, I end up fleeing the cafeteria. It's the hardest place to be. for me in middle school for a whole host of reasons. And the place I went, a place I had been informed at the beginning of my middle school career, it was okay to be, the place I went was my middle school library. And I had a great middle school library. It was big, and there was all sorts of kind of spaces you could occupy, group tables, those carols that were more private that you could sit at. And we had a great full-time librarian. And that's where I went to eat my lunch or not eat my lunch. And what I did, because I needed a reason to be in there, was I read. I pretended I was reading a book, or I was really eventually reading books. I was doing what Mr. Lombard told me. You can always find what you need in books. And I was looking and looking, and I didn't find much that was doing it for me. There weren't many books out there. I think I found one book about an eating disorder when I was a kid in the library. And it was about a girl who was already, when you open the book, it was already, she was in the midst of a full-fledged eating disorder and already hospitalized. And while I'm glad that book existed and that we need all of the books we can get about that sort of stuff, because I had not yet done there, the lack of other stories on this topic and other angles and perspectives and other takes, it actually made me, helped me convince myself that what I was doing was fine. Because I was stopping short up to, at that point, I was stopping short of a full-blown eating disorder. And so that one example of that book, because it was the only one, actually, I think, did more damage to me than it did good. But there was a librarian at this library of mine, and she, of course, noticed what kids were in there all the time, and maybe even more noticed what kids were in there all the time and not coming up and talking to her, were in there sort of hiding out like me. And she, very carefully, gingerly, so I wasn't, scared off, started talking to me, asking me what I was reading. And she had that same sort of skill that Mr. Lombard had, where they know things even without you saying them. They pick up on things. And she was looking for all those things. And my librarian started to give me books. She didn't know exactly what was going on, but she found all sorts of books in which kids were feeling feelings and going through things that she thought I would be able to relate and recognize with. She gave me tons of books. And she wouldn't just give me those types of books. She would often give me other types of books, so I didn't feel uncomfortable about getting all the sad books. She gave me funny books too, all sorts of books. But she was getting me the ones I needed. She gave me book after book after book. We began talking about those books, sharing about them. And bit by bit, I began to feel less alone. I began to see examples in books of kids getting better, of middle school and the troubles in middle school ending. I began to feel less desperate and more hopeful. And it was a slow process, of course, but I don't think it's an overstatement to say that my middle school librarian had a hand in saving my life. I think if I hadn't had a library to go to, if I hadn't had an adult there watching out and sort of guiding me gently, I don't know what I would have done, but I don't think I would have ever gotten better. And thanks to my middle school librarian and thanks to Mr. Lombard, that's exactly why I'm here. That's how I got here. I got here because of Mr. Lombard and because of my middle school librarian. I don't know if I would have made it out of middle school without my middle school librarian, and I don't know, without Mr. Lombard, if I ever would have given school another chance, if I had gotten Mr. Heron in 5th grade and then gone on to middle school. If I didn't have that example of him in 4th grade, I don't know where I would have been. But it led me to do what I do, to give back to this world of books by contributing my own. So here are some of the books that I mentioned earlier. I make all sorts of books, hopefully for all sorts of readers. These are early readers, and I try to make these books, I try to help show kids how fun reading can be if they're being read aloud to, that it can be a place for collective enjoyment and bonding. Also, these books are made to help kids develop their own independent reading and confidence. I make chapter books for kids who need to move along and build their confidence even further with the comfort of a series while also being challenged. And in these books, I also try to guide them through issues that I think every kid will deal with, whether it's in a classroom, with a friend group, on the playground, in the cafeteria. I make graphic novels that are for our visual kids, the kids who are extra stimulated by visual input. And there are no soapboxes up here, so I'm going to refrain. But I could have had a whole hour talk just about how the resistance to graphic novels is absurd, and I encounter it everywhere I go still. It blows my mind. I went after, there's a tiny soapbox, sorry, it's hard to see. After Jerry Craft won, you can probably even find this. I posted after the morning Jerry Craft won the Newbery, I was like, we're done with this graphic novels aren't real. We're done that they're Twinkies and text novels are broccoli. This is over. It's so not over. It boggles my mind that these people aren't understanding and valuing and learning about how these kids are not looking for an easy way out. They're looking for a more authentic and stimulating experience to get access to books. And none of those people who doubt graphic novels have ever given one the time of day and actually read one. Anyway, I also make middle grade novels. These books are designed to build kids' confidence, to get them reading and wanting to keep reading. And I make activity books to help kids create. The goal of my work when I'm with kids and in my activity books, my goal is always not to leave kids impressed by what I can do, but to leave them impressed by what they can do. It's why I make my art look like it does. It influences everything I do. So I've got activity books, and then I made 3 activity books during the pandemic, and one of them we have kept online for free. So you don't even need to buy these. You can just go to my website and print out. I think there's like 350 free activities on there. And then I made this book. And a librarian in Washington said one of the kindest things and summed it up better than I could have. But in her review of a work in progress, her name's Chrissy Wright. She's really great if you want to seek her out on Instagram. She's great. I get so many book recommendations from her. But she posted a review of this book. She was one of the first to post a review, and she said, Jarrett Lerner has proven that he knows how to give kids books they want. And now he's working on giving kids some books that they need. And she said it better than I could, but I hope this book both encourages readers and builds their confidence and gets them thinking differently about what books can add to their life. But I also hope it's a book that a lot of them might need and will benefit from having. So all of that, all of those books, and a bunch more on the way, they are all because one teacher of mine said one thing to me one day. He didn't say, see me after class. He didn't say, go to the principal's office. He didn't say, I'm calling your parents. He said, you really like drawing, don't you? He figured out, he saw me. He met me where I was, and he figured out how to bring me in. And it has led to all of this and more. So, and I put this slide in because this book has done for me, just on a personal level, a lot more than any other of my books. I tried to break my contract when I was writing this book because I didn't think I could do it. Once I have a great support network, and I did it, and then I said, I told my booking agent, I think I'm not going to talk about this book on school visits. I was too scared, and I was terrified, and it brought back all the dark things I thought I had sort of put at bay. It was really a really tough experience. When I finished the book, my mother-in-law came over to my house later that night, and my wife was like, he sent in the final art, and it's going to print, and she said, that must have been so cathartic, my mother-in-law, and I said, no, it sucked, the whole thing. There was no catharsis. The experience was brutal. And I wasn't going to talk about it. I was just going to be like, I'm done, I did it. And then an incredible author and friend of mine, I had a conversation with her, Linda Mullally Hunt, convinced me to think otherwise. And she said, you go up on those stages and get in those gyms and those auditoriums and classrooms, and you be as vulnerable as you can be, and you are not going to believe what it's going to bring you and give you. And the first stop on my tour for this book in May of last year was in Chicago. And I talked to 4th and 5th graders about it. And as soon as I was done, I was shaking. I was terrified. I thought it had gone terribly. As soon as I was done, a girl came up to me and started crying and hugged me and just said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And that was all the catharsis I needed. I was like, I'm good. I'm done. I'm glad I did it. I'm good. But this book and talking to kids about this book has done for me personally a tremendous amount. It has made me healthier and in a better place in my life than I thought I would ever be. So that's why I singled out this book as Mr. Lombard and my middle school librarian helped make this. So that is the answer of how I got here. And the answer to the second question is much shorter, I promise. The answer to the second question I said I wanted to answer is why I'm here and what I think I can maybe give you and leave you with. And what I want to leave you with, besides that story, is I guess the reminder, which you don't need this reminder. But as librarians, if you are a librarian, we heard last night at this dinner we were at, librarians have the privileged position in a school of interacting with every single kid. Not just one class, not just one grade, every single kid. During your school day, you encounter so many kids. You have so many interactions with them that are long, that are short, 10 minutes, 10 seconds, maybe just 10 words. But what I want to remind you of is that all it took for me was 10 words, less than 10 words. And unfortunately, not all former students are going to hunt you down and find you and write keynote addresses about you. But I hope a lot do, and I hope some do. But there is no way, even if you got a dozen of those messages a day, there is no way the number of kids that you are touching and changing the lives of will ever tell you. And I'm willing to bet, having met a lot of educators and librarians throughout my life, all of you are too humble to admit what the real number is. But you have such an amazing, beautiful, wonderful, powerful, awesome, and I mean in terms of awe-inspiring job that does not get the respect or appreciation or funding that it ought to, or understanding or basic understanding. But you have the ability to change the course of so many kids' lives with those interactions, with turning them into people who can't just read, but who are readers. And I hope you remember the power that you have and the incredible work you're doing. I can't think of any work that is more important. And you never know what these kids are going to become, but it might lead to a kid becoming an author and making a lot more of these things, which are one of the main reasons, in addition to kids, that we are here celebrating and learning from each other and sharing. So that's me, and that's my story. And I still have some time if anyone wants to do Q&A, and we can end early and stuff. But a question that I've often got asked at the end of this after doing Q&A is people say, have you talked to Mr. Lombard? They want to know if I reached out to him. I did. I talked to Mr. Lombard. He's not a fan of the internet, or he's not a fan of using the internet. He's old school. But his daughter and I are in contact, and she shares things from him with me, and I share things. He's seen all of this. He's seen the slides. I have taken the time to make sure he knows the impact he had on my life, that I think about him on a nearly daily basis, and the things he taught me, and how grateful I am that I got to sit in his classroom. So, again, I hope you guys will remember how many lives you're changing in just that way. Is it okay to do some questions?
Just give it up.
Oh, thank you guys.
Questions for Jarrett?
It's also okay if there's no questions. No?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So you write for young readers. So what's the experience like when you go to like an elementary school?
Yeah, so I primarily do K through 8. And when schools ask if they have a pre-K program in the school, I always say I'd be happy to hang out with the pre-K kids. You never know what you're going to get. It's always the most exciting part of the day. The other day I had a pre-K kid keep her hand up for the entire length of the workshop I did. The entire length, even when her teachers told her. It would creep down and pop right back up. And then finally I said, okay, Q&A, what's your question? And she just got on the microphone. She was like way too close. And she said, how many wobbly teeth do you have? And then I said, I have. And she said, I have 4. And it was like the highlight of my whole day. So even pre-K. But in terms of hanging out with the kids, what's amazing, and the reason why I do it, I guess the way that I would answer it, is that growing up, I never had an author visit. Someone in the signing line earlier asked me if I always wanted to be a writer. And the answer was that I always loved writing. I always loved illustrating. I was always doing it. But I didn't know I could be an author as a career. And what's more, I didn't believe I could do it. I had no belief in myself. The first time I really understood that I could actually do it was when a professor of mine took me aside shortly before college graduation and asked me if I was going to try to have a career as an author. And it seemed preposterous to me. I had been creative writing with him. I had been in his English class. So he knew that it was the thing I loved and was passionate about. I still didn't believe that I could do it. And I believe that if I had an author visit in 5th grade and 6th grade and 7th grade, and I had an author come to my school and talk about the sort of stuff that I talk to kids about how hard it is to make books, about how much revision it is, about how it's challenging and interesting and fun and all of that stuff, how it doesn't come easy. If I had had that, I think I would have had my own self-belief 2 decades before. And so letting kids know, doing what I said I do, and trying to leave them impressed by what they can do, not by what I do and have done, but what they can do, and arming them with the knowledge that they can do it. I usually get feedback from teachers and they say, all my kids wanted to do when they came back to class was make their own stories, make their own comics. We can't get anything done. They just want to write. They just want to read. So yeah, an author visit. And this is not an advertisement for you to come get me. There are tons of great authors. There are tons of great authors locally that you wouldn't have to fly out anywhere, I know, that are around here. But the power of an author visit, especially for a kid who loves this stuff already, it is just, I can't even, I can't overstate it. And what's great too is that often you can talk with the author and say, will you maybe add a bit about this or that? Because unfortunately, there are things that if I stand on stage in front of them and say, they will believe me and nod their heads. And even if you have said them every day for the whole school year, it sometimes takes, like, remember what that kid said, what that author said? And you're like, I've been saying that every day. But yeah, so it's a weird power they invest in us, even though we're ordinary people. But yeah, I would just say it's transformational. It's amazing.
Librarians do not think that authors are ordinary people. You are rock stars.
You guys are the rock stars. You guys are doing the more difficult, challenging, now more than ever, work. And I view authors, librarians, educators, administrators, I hope that we all just can view each other as colleagues. Our mission at the end of the day, I think, and this is true, I would say, of 99% of the children's book authors I know and have met, our goal is to improve and enrich the lives of kids through reading and books. Our goal is not to stroke our egos and sell more books than the next person. I mean, that helps us make a living. But the goal is kids. And when all of our goal is to benefit and help kids, then us just seeing each other as partners, the more we work together, it benefits my work, I know, meeting kids, interacting with kids, hearing from kids, learning from you all about what goes on in libraries and classrooms. And hopefully it's vice versa. But I am flying home tonight to tag in for to finish up some potty training. So if you guys think about me being a rock star, you're like, oh, remember that guy, rock star? Just imagine me like perched beside a toilet for 3.5 hours, or cleaning up some accidents, and hopefully the rock star patina will fade.
I believe you're being a little. There's a word for it that's escaping my right now, but a work in progress. Did you not win awards?
So a work in progress. It's nominated for a bunch of awards right now, some state awards, and it got a bunch of very nice reviews. It was part of the Global Read Aloud, Pernell Rip's amazing program, and it's part of Project Lit right now. So yeah, a lot of amazing things, and it's incredible that the book I didn't want to put out and was most scared of coming out has definitely been the most. Has received the most acclaim. Yeah, thanks. I paid her to set that question up.
I just was wondering, because I work at the high school level, and we have a lot of kids that are still struggling with that type of thing. Have you thought about writing for the older kids?
Yeah. So I mentioned that I learn at these things more than anything else, and don't tweet this out or anything, but the thing that I've been hearing for years now, I first heard it in Florida at a conference probably 2.5 years ago, was a librarian who became a friend. I was at a meal with her at this conference, and she said, will you please write books, the sorts of books you write that will appeal to my high school boys in particular. And I have heard, and now I ask around when I meet other librarians, high school librarians, and I've heard from so many that the books that are most checked out from their library, especially by their boys in their high schools, are Wimpy Kid books. That they are the most circulated books. And those books are great. I love Jeff Kinney, I love the Wimpy Kid books, but those are not books for high schoolers. They need books that are dealing with things that are appropriate and that are going on in their life. They don't need to be reading about middle school still. So that is a massive hole in the market that it blows my mind that it's still not filled. There's very little out there that really tries to hook those high schoolers who still haven't found that book, those books that are going to get them invested and then moving on to other kinds of books. And so, yeah, I'm working on a project right now that is hopefully going to fill that space. It hasn't sold yet. It hasn't sold yet, but thank you. Yeah.
So who do we need to call?
I just had a conversation this morning with my agent about it, but if you want to get Simon and Schuster on the horn, let them know.
We know people who know
Yeah.
people.
So she asked about, since I write and illustrate, how do I go about it? And the answer kind of goes back to those kids who are loving graphic novels, actually. My brain does not imagine just in words. It definitely doesn't imagine in perfect sentences. When I'm imagining and a story is coming at me, there are words, there are pictures. And so I start all of my stories in composition notebooks, which I love showing to kids. Like, you can get this for 49 cents at the corner store. That's where I begin them all, and it's because I can move much more fluently between words and pictures. And so my first drafts in my notebooks, they actually look a great deal like a work in progress does, where there are words and pictures and doodles and comics alongside text. It's a big jumble. And typically, once I get a sense of the story, I begin to think about what form will best serve that story. Is this story going to be most powerfully and enjoyably told as a graphic novel, as an illustrated chapter book, as as just no illustrations, just text? And then I start telling the story more in that form. And in terms of the words or pictures, illustration is, at least in current world of children's books, is never purely illustrative. It's always additive. It's servicing the story. So for me, as I'm working on a story, sometimes I'll need to figure out an illustration. I'll be writing, and I'll need to figure out an illustration to see how the story is advancing and what I don't need to write. But it typically is a back and forth yo-yoing. And then some days, words are just not coming to me. Some days I'm just not drawing. Like, I just can't get, my brain and my hand are just not working. And then so I'll force myself to work on one or the other. But it's very hard to separate the two things for me. They are both ways that I'm making meaning and trying to get the story out. Yeah.
We'd like to thank Jarrett Lerner again for joining
guys.
us today. So Jarrett will be out in the by story cupboard if you want a book signed or personalized. So please meet Jarrett out there. If you'd like to stay, we have Maria Jones from Canyons who will be delivering her message. I judge books by their cover.
Thank you guys for coming, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.